I was pretending to nap when I overheard my husband on the phone. That's how I found out he'd been secretly planning my accident for months. It started as one of those lazy Sunday afternoons where the autumn light filtered through our living room windows, casting everything in golden hues that should have felt peaceful. David thought I was asleep on the couch, curled under my grandmother's hand-stitched quilt, the one with tiny purple flowers that she'd worked on during her final months in the nursing home. I'd been fighting a splitting migraine since dawn, the kind that made my vision blur and my stomach churn, accompanied by that familiar nausea that always came with my worst headaches. When David suggested I rest while he handled some business calls, I gratefully closed my eyes and let the pain medication pull me toward sleep, or so he thought. I was floating in that strange half-awake state, somewhere between consciousness and dreams, when his voice drifted from the kitchen, low and careful. At first, it sounded like any other work conversation. David owned Summit Builders, a small company that specialized in residential renovations, always dealing with subcontractors, permits, and building inspections. His voice carried that familiar, professional tone I'd heard thousands of times over our 22 years of marriage. The same tone he used when discussing foundation problems or roof repairs with clients. But something felt different. Something in the way he kept his voice deliberately quiet, almost whispering, made my body tense beneath the quilt. The brake lines are the cleanest option, he was saying. His words measured and deliberate. Make it look like natural wear and tear. Nothing suspicious that would trigger an investigation. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Every muscle in my body screamed to sit up, to demand answers, to confront him right then and there. Instead, I forced my breathing to remain deep and steady, fighting every survival instinct that told me to run as far and as fast as I could. She takes that mountain road to her sister's house every Wednesday morning. David continued, his voice so calm and matter-of-fact, it made my skin crawl. Same time, same route. Been doing it religiously for 3 years now, ever since her mother passed away. Never deviates from the schedule. Never takes alternate routes. I wanted to vomit that winding mountain road to visit my sister, Sarah. Route 7 with its hairpin turns and steep drop-offs into the valley below. The route I'd driven every single Wednesday since Mom's funeral because Sarah and I had promised each other over Mom's casket that we'd never let grief pull us apart the way it had destroyed our cousins' relationships after their parents died. I'd always been extra careful on that road, knowing how dangerous it could be in bad weather, how many accidents had happened on those curves over the years. The insurance policy pays double for accidental death. David's voice continued, and I could hear him moving around the kitchen, probably pacing between the island and the sink the way he always did when he was working through complex problems. 200,000 versus the standard life insurance, which only covers natural causes and has that 2-year suicide clause we'd have to wait out. My hands started trembling uncontrollably beneath the quilt. $200,000. That's what my life was worth to him. 22 years of marriage, of shared dreams and struggles and intimate moments, reduced to a dollar amount on an insurance policy. Tomorrow's Tuesday, he said, and I could hear the satisfaction creeping into his voice like poison. I'll handle it Tuesday night when she's at her book club meeting. She never gets home before 10:30 on Tuesdays. Gives me plenty of time to work. Wednesday morning, problem solved. Clean, simple, untraceable. The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing in my chest and stealing my breath. My heart hammered so violently against my ribs. I was certain he'd hear it from the kitchen. This wasn't some desperate spur-of-the-moment decision born from financial pressure or temporary insanity. This was calculated, planned, methodical. He'd been studying my routine, timing my habits, analyzing my schedule, preparing to murder me with the same careful attention to detail he used for construction projects. What about afterward? I heard him ask and realized someone else was on the line. I mean, how long before someone finds her? My stomach lurched. He was discussing the discovery of my body like it was a logistical problem to solve. The road curves around Wilson's Pass about 2 miles before it straightens out toward town, David continued. There's that steep drop-off where the guardrail was damaged in last winter's storm and never properly repaired. If the brakes fail there, the car would go right over the edge. probably wouldn't be found for hours. Maybe not until evening when Sarah starts wondering why I haven't called to check if she made it home safely. The level of detail was horrifying. He'd not only planned my death, but calculated exactly how long my body would lie broken in a ravine before anyone discovered the wreckage. Insurance investigates all accidental deaths. The voice on the other end said, a man's voice I didn't recognize. But if the brake failure looks natural, if there's no evidence of tampering, they'll process the claim without much scrutiny, especially with no history of marital problems or financial motives. David actually chuckled at this assessment of how easy it would be to get away with murdering me. That's the beauty of it, he said. We've been the perfect couple for over 20 years. Everyone in town knows how devoted I am to Olivia. Her death will be tragic, but no one will suspect anything other than a terrible accident. The casual cruelty of hearing my own name spoken in the context of my planned murder made bile rise in my throat. The phone call ended with a soft click. I heard his footsteps crossing the hardwood floor, coming toward the living room where I lay pretending to sleep. Each footfall sounded unnaturally loud in my ears, like thunder announcing an approaching storm. Hey there, sweetheart. David's voice was gentle and loving as he perched on the edge of the couch and shook my shoulder with what seemed like genuine tender concern. How's that headache? You feeling any better now? I opened my eyes and looked up at the face I'd trusted completely for over 2 decades. The same warm brown eyes that had gazed at me lovingly on our wedding day in the little chapel outside town. The same hands that had held mine through my father's sudden heart attack. My mother's slow, painful decline from cancer. Every crisis and celebration we'd weathered together as a team. And now those hands were planning to kill me. Much better, I managed to say, forcing my voice to sound sleepy and content while my mind raced with terror. The rest really helped. That medication Dr. Davis prescribed is amazing. David smiled and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. The gesture so familiar and loving that for a split second I wondered if I'd somehow misheard the conversation. Maybe I'd been dreaming. Maybe the migraine medication had caused hallucinations. But the cold certainty in my gut told me otherwise. Good. I'm glad, he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. I was thinking we could order Chinese tonight from Panda Garden, the one with the amazing sweet and sour chicken. My last meal, I thought with crystal clarity. He's planning what he thinks will be my last meal. That sounds absolutely perfect, I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat like a living thing. David stood up and stretched, looking every inch the caring, devoted husband. I've got some paperwork to finish up in the office. Then we'll have a nice quiet evening together. I watched him walk away, noting details I'd never paid attention to before. The slight limp in his left leg from an old construction accident. The way he favored his right shoulder when lifting heavy objects. The scar on his knuckles from a mishap with a circular saw 3 years ago. If I was going to survive this, I needed to start thinking like him, calculating, observing, planning. That evening, we shared our Chinese takeout at the kitchen table while rain drummed against the windows. David was more attentive than he'd been in months, asking about my day, telling stories about his work crew, laughing at my jokes. Under normal circumstances, I would have been delighted by the attention. Instead, every smile felt like a mask. Every tender gesture felt like manipulation. You know what I was thinking today? David said, twirling lo mein noodles around his fork. We should take that vacation we've been talking about. Maybe somewhere warm this winter, Florida or the Caribbean. A vacation he knew I'd never live to take. That sounds wonderful, I said, playing along with his charade. We haven't had a real vacation in years. I'll start looking at packages tomorrow, he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. We deserve some time together, just the two of us. After dinner, David settled into his recliner to watch the Sunday night football game while I cleaned up the kitchen. Every ordinary domestic action felt surreal, like I was performing in a play where only I knew the tragic ending. Loading the dishwasher, wiping down the counters, putting away leftovers that David thought I'd never eat. That night, I lay awake beside him in our king-sized bed, listening to his peaceful, rhythmic breathing while staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. How could he sleep so soundly while planning to murder his wife? How could his conscience be so clear? I studied his face in the pale moonlight streaming through our bedroom windows. The same face I'd kissed goodnight for over 2 decades. The face I'd memorized in every mood and expression. When had he stopped loving me? When had I transformed from his partner into an obstacle worth eliminating? Had there been signs I'd missed, red flags I'd ignored in my trusting naivety? I thought back over recent months, searching for clues I might have dismissed. David had been working longer hours, claiming the construction business was booming. He'd been more interested in our finances lately, asking detailed questions about my teacher's pension and the life insurance policies we'd taken out years ago. He'd encouraged me to maintain my routines, particularly my Wednesday visits to Sarah, always asking about my exact departure and arrival times. I attributed all of this to normal life changes. A successful business, responsible financial planning, caring concern for my well-being. Now I saw it all as evidence of a calculated plan to murder me. The questions tormented me through the longest night of my life. The next morning, David was unusually attentive in a way that now felt sinister. He brought me coffee in bed, perfectly prepared with 2 sugars and a splash of cream, just the way I liked it. He kissed my forehead and told me he loved me. His performance so flawless it would have fooled anyone who hadn't overheard that phone call. "I've got a really long day ahead of me," he said, straightening his navy work shirt and checking his appearance in our dresser mirror. "The Franklin renovation is behind schedule and we've got that inspection coming up Thursday. Might be working late tonight on the electrical issues." Working late, right? He'd be working late sabotaging my bra lines. "Of course, honey," I said, sitting up in bed and smiling at him. "I'll probably read for a while after book club anyway. That new mystery novel Susan recommended." "What time does book club usually end?" He asked casually as if he didn't already know my schedule by heart. "Around 10, sometimes 10:30, if we get really into the discussion," I replied, noting how he nodded with satisfaction. After he left for work, I sat alone in our kitchen, surrounded by 22 years of accumulated memories. Wedding photos magnet to the refrigerator, showing us young and radiant and hopelessly in love. His favorite coffee mug sitting next to mine in the sink, still stained with this morning's coffee. The ceramic owl figurine I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. Perched on the windowsill where it had watched over us through countless ordinary mornings, just like this one. Everything looked normal. Everything looked safe. But underneath the familiar domestic tranquility, I could feel the foundation of my entire life crumbling. I had 2 choices: run or fight. Running meant abandoning everything. Our home, my job at the county library where I'd worked for 15 years, my life here, my sister who depended on our weekly visits to help her cope with her own grief and depression following our mother's death. It meant liquidating whatever assets I could access, draining our joint checking account, and disappearing into anonymity somewhere David could never find me. It meant living in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, never knowing if he would track me down and find another way to finish what he'd started. Fighting meant staying and trying to outsmart a man who apparently thought I was too naive and trusting to survive without him. It meant gathering evidence involving law enforcement and risking everything on the hope that the justice system would protect me from my own husband. I chose to fight. But first, I needed proof. Something more substantial than an overheard phone conversation that could be dismissed as a misunderstanding or taken out of context. I spent the morning systematically searching David's home office, looking through his files, his computer, his desk drawers, anywhere he might have left evidence of his murderous plans. The office had always been David's private domain, and I'd respected that boundary throughout our marriage. Now, violation of his privacy seemed like a small transgression compared to him planning my murder. His computer was password protected, but I knew David well enough to guess correctly on the 3rd try. Summit 47, his business name, and our house number. I scrolled through his emails, finding nothing unusual in his business correspondence. His browser history showed normal construction-related searches mixed with news sites and sports scores. But hidden behind our insurance documents in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, I found a business card that made my blood run cold. O'Malley's Auto Repair. We fix what others can't. Expert in brake systems and accident reconstruction. I'd never heard of this place in my life. David always took our cars to Henderson's Auto downtown where his buddy Mike Thompson had been servicing our vehicles for over a decade. Mike always gave us discounts and explained exactly what was wrong in terms I could understand, treating us like family rather than customers. The address on O'Malley's card was across town in an industrial area I rarely visited, tucked between a scrapyard and a discount tire. I grabbed my purse and keys, my hands shaking as I started my car, the same 2018 Toyota Camry that David planned to sabotage in less than 12 hours. The drive across town gave me time to think about what I'd say, how I'd approach this without arousing suspicion. I needed information about David's visit without revealing why I was asking. O'Malley's Automotive turned out to be exactly what I'd expected. A grimy, rundown shop with 3 garage bays and a small office area that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. The waiting area smelled like motor oil and cigarettes, with outdated magazines scattered across cracked vinyl chairs and a coffee maker that looked older than my marriage. NASCAR memorabilia covered the walls, and a small television played a daytime talk show with the volume turned low. The owner emerged from beneath the hood of a rusted pickup truck when I rang the service bell. He was a weathered man in his 60s with permanently oil-stained hands, suspicious eyes, and gray hair that stuck out in all directions. His work shirt had O'Malley embroidered over the pocket in faded red thread. "Help you with something?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag that looked like it hadn't been clean in years. "I hope so," I said, trying to sound casual and friendly. "My husband, David Davidson, came in a few weeks ago asking about brake systems." I wanted to follow up about some concerns he mentioned. O'Malley's expression shifted, becoming more interested. "Yeah, I remember that guy. Real specific questions about brake failures. Wanted to know how they might fail naturally, what the warning signs would be, how long it might take for a complete failure to occur." My stomach dropped into my shoes. When exactly was this? O'Malley scratched his graying beard thoughtfully, leaving a small smear of grease on his chin. "Maybe 3-4 weeks ago. Hard to say exactly. He didn't write anything down, just asked a lot of technical questions and took some notes on his phone." "What kind of questions?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice level. "Wanted to know about corrosion patterns, how brake fluidly, what kind of damage would look natural versus intentional tampering. Said he was real concerned about his wife's safety. Wanted to make sure he could recognize the warning signs before something bad happened." I bet he was concerned about my safety. "Did he mention anything specific about our car?" "A 2018 Toyota Camry." O'Malley nodded slowly. "Matter of fact, he did. Asked about the brake system design for that model year, where the lines run, how accessible they are. Real detailed questions for someone who just wanted to know about maintenance." "Why? Did he schedule any work to be done?" I asked, my heart pounding. O'Malley shook his head. "Nah, just asked his questions and left. But he seemed like he knew what he was looking for, if you know what I mean. Not like most folks who come in here confused about car trouble." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "Well, most people want to know how to fix problems or prevent them. Your husband was asking about how brake failures happen, what they look like, how long they take, questions you'd ask if you were investigating an accident, not trying to prevent one." I forced myself to smile and nod, as if this information was reassuring rather than terrifying. He's always been very thorough about safety. That's why I wanted to check, make sure he hadn't scheduled any surprise maintenance or anything. "Nothing like that," O'Malley assured me. "But you tell him if he ever needs real work done, I give fair prices. Been in business here for 32 years. As I drove away from O'Malley's shop, the pieces of David's plan clicked together with terrifying clarity. This hadn't been a sudden decision made in desperation or a moment of insanity. He'd been researching, planning, preparing for weeks, maybe months. The insurance beneficiary change he'd casually asked me to sign last month, claiming it was just routine paperwork updating our policies. I'd trusted him completely, never bothering to read the fine print or ask detailed questions. The way he'd been encouraging me to stick to my routines, especially my Wednesday drives to visit Sarah, always asking about my timing and route. His sudden interest in my schedule, always wanting to know exactly when I'd be home from various activities. He'd been studying me like a predator studies prey, learning my patterns and vulnerabilities, identifying the perfect time and place to strike. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd discovered. But as I pulled into our driveway, I realized I couldn't just sit around waiting for David to come home and act normal. I needed more information, more evidence, more proof of his intentions. I called the library and told my supervisor I was taking a sick day due to my migraine. Then I drove to the county courthouse to research our insurance policies and any recent changes David might have made. The clerk in the records office was helpful but limited in what she could access. However, she was able to confirm that David had indeed made changes to our life insurance beneficiaries and coverage amounts within the past 2 months. The details would require a formal request and several days to process, but she could tell me that significant modifications had been made. "Is there some problem with the policies?" she asked, noting my obvious distress. "Just trying to understand some changes my husband made," I said weakly, making sure everything is in order. My next stop was the insurance office where we'd purchased our policies. The agent, a friendly woman named Linda, who'd handled our account for years, was more forthcoming with information. "Oh yes. David was very concerned about making sure you were properly protected," Linda said, pulling up our file on her computer. "He increased your accidental death benefit significantly and changed the primary beneficiary structure. Very responsible planning, especially given your weekly drives on that dangerous mountain road." "He mentioned the mountain road specifically," I asked. "Oh yes, he was quite worried about the safety risks. Said he'd been researching accident statistics for that stretch of highway and wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of if anything happened." Such a caring husband. I felt sick. David had been setting the stage for my death for months, creating a paper trail that would support his grief-stricken widower act while maximizing his financial benefit from my murder. That evening, David came home carrying a bouquet of yellow roses, my favorite flowers, and a bottle of expensive wine, the same Pinot Grigio we'd shared on our anniversary 3 months earlier. "I thought we could have a really nice dinner before your book club tomorrow," he said, his smile warm and genuine as he handed me the flowers. "Maybe cook together like we used to when we were newlyweds. I picked up some fresh salmon and those herb potatoes you love." I accepted the flowers and kissed his cheek, playing the devoted, unsuspecting wife one last time while my skin crawled at his touch. The roses smelled beautiful, their fragrance filling our kitchen with the scent of what David intended to be my funeral flowers. We spent the evening cooking together, sharing the wine, talking and laughing like the happy couple we'd once been. David was charming and attentive, asking about my day at the library, telling funny stories about his work crew's latest mishaps, acting like the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. He even put on some of our old favorite music, singing along to songs that had soundtracked our early relationship. If I hadn't overheard that phone call, I would have thought we were having one of our best evenings in months. The irony was devastating. David was giving me the attention and affection I'd been craving, knowing it would be the last time. "You know what I love about us?" David said as we cleaned up after dinner, his arm around my waist as we stood at the sink. "After all these years, we still know how to have fun together. Some couples grow apart, but we've grown stronger." I leaned into him, playing my part while fighting the urge to recoil from his touch. "We have been through a lot together, and we'll get through whatever comes next," he said, kissing the top of my head. "I promise I'll always take care of you." The words were like daggers in my chest, knowing exactly how he planned to take care of me. At book club the next evening, I found myself completely unable to concentrate on our discussion of the month's selection, a mystery novel about a woman who discovers her husband's dark secrets. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I couldn't appreciate it through my terror. We met at Susan's house, the same group of 8 women who'd been gathering monthly for over 5 years. Susan, our unofficial leader, and retired English teacher, Brenda, who ran the local Bloom's florist. Michelle, a nurse at the community health center. Rebecca, whose husband owned the Ace Hardware. Diane, recently retired from the bank, and 3 others whose comfortable presence had become a fixture in my life. "Olivia, you seem a million miles away tonight," Susan said during our break, studying my face with concern. You haven't said a word about the book, and usually you have the most insightful comments. I wanted desperately to tell her everything, to break down and confess the nightmare my life had become. Instead, I smiled weakly and blamed my distraction on work stress and lingering effects from my migraine. Actually, the headache is coming back. I lied, gathering my purse and jacket. I think I should head home early and get some rest. Are you sure you're okay to drive? Michelle asked, her nurse's instincts kicking in. You look really pale. I'll be fine, I assured her. It's not that far. But instead of driving home to the house where my husband was waiting with tools to sabotage my car, I went straight to the county sheriff's office. The night dispatcher, a young man who looked barely old enough to drive, seemed skeptical of my story at first, but when I mentioned Detective Maria Rodriguez by name, Michelle from book club had told me Rodriguez was the best investigator in the department. He agreed to call her in. Detective Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of direct manner that inspired confidence. She listened to my story with growing alarm and concern, taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about timing, evidence, and my safety. This is extremely serious, Mrs. Davidson, she said when I finished explaining everything. But we're going to need solid evidence to build a case that will hold up in court. A phone conversation, even recorded, can be explained away by a good defense attorney. Are you willing to help us catch him in the act? My hands trembled as I signed the consent forms to wear a recording device and cooperate with a surveillance operation. We'll also need to inspect your vehicle immediately, Detective Rodriguez explained. If he hasn't tampered with it yet, we can set up surveillance to catch him when he does. We'll also want to plant some cameras in your garage and around your property. What if he's already done it? I asked, suddenly terrified that my car might already be a death trap. Then we'll have evidence of tampering and we'll arrest him tonight, Rodriguez said firmly. Either way, you're not driving that car until we know it's safe. They impounded my Toyota that night and brought in a forensics team to examine every inch of the brake system. Meanwhile, Rodriguez arranged for me to stay at a safe house, a nondescript apartment across town where David couldn't find me. We need him to think everything is normal, Rodriguez explained. Tomorrow morning, you'll drive a police vehicle that looks identical to your Toyota back to your house. We'll have officers watching from multiple positions, and when he makes his move, we'll have him. I barely slept that night, alternating between terror and rage as I thought about David's betrayal. Not just the murder plot, but the months of lies and manipulation that had led up to it. How long had he been planning this? How long had he been living a double life, pretending to love me while plotting my death? The forensics report came back clean. My brakes hadn't been tampered with yet, which meant David was still planning to sabotage them Tuesday night as scheduled. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly with thick clouds hanging low over the mountains like a funeral shroud. I drove the decoy Toyota back to my house, my heart pounding as I pulled into the garage where hidden cameras would soon record my husband's attempt at murder. David was in the kitchen making breakfast when I entered through the garage door, humming cheerfully while he scrambled eggs and buttered toast. The picture of domestic contentment. Perfect timing, he said, kissing me good morning as if nothing had changed. I made your favorite eggs Benedict with those English muffins from the bakery. Another last meal prepared with loving care by the man who planned to kill me in a few hours. You're so sweet, I said, forcing myself to hug him while wearing the wire that would record every word. What's the occasion? No occasion, David said, his smile genuine and warm. Just felt like spoiling my beautiful wife. We ate breakfast together at our kitchen table, discussing ordinary things, the weather forecast, his work schedule, my plans to visit Sarah. David was more attentive than he'd been in months, asking detailed questions about my sister's well-being and suggesting we should have her over for dinner soon. Drive extra carefully today, he said as I prepared to leave, helping me into my jacket like the gentleman he'd always been. Those mountain roads get really slippery when it's wet like this. I worry about you making that drive in bad weather. He walked me to the garage and kissed me goodbye at the car door, his hands resting on my shoulders as he looked into my eyes with what appeared to be genuine love and concern. I love you so much, Olivia, he said softly. You mean everything to me. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought his emotion was real and touching. I love you, too, I whispered back, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. I drove to Sarah's house as usual, the tiny recording device taped to my chest capturing every racing heartbeat. Detective Rodriguez and her team followed at a careful distance in unmarked cars, maintaining radio contact as we navigated the familiar route. At Sarah's modest ranch house on the outskirts of town, I tried to act normal while my nerves screamed with tension. Sarah had always been perceptive, and she immediately noticed my agitated state. Olivia, you're really starting to scare me, my sister said, watching me pace her living room like a caged animal. You've been acting strange for days. What's going on? I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Not until David was safely behind bars and the nightmare was over. Just some stress at work, I said weakly, unable to meet her eyes. Budget cuts and reorganization. You know how it is. But Sarah knew me too well to buy such a transparent lie. This isn't work stress, she said firmly, grabbing my hands to stop my pacing. This is something serious. Talk to me. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message from David. Hope you're having a wonderful visit with Sarah. The weather is clearing up nicely here. Love you so much, sweetheart. The audacity and cruelty of it made me physically ill. He was checking my location, confirming I was safely out of the way while he prepared to murder me. Olivia, you're shaking, Sarah said, her voice filled with alarm. What's wrong? What aren't you telling me? At exactly 2:47 p.m., my phone rang. Detective Rodriguez's number. We have him, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. He's in your garage right now with a full toolbox working under your car. We can see everything on the surveillance cameras, him loosening brake line connections, making small cuts that would cause gradual failure, making it look like natural wear and corrosion. We're moving in to arrest him now. I collapsed into Sarah's arms. 24 hours of constant terror finally catching up with me as my body shook with exhausted sobs. Olivia, what's happening? Sarah demanded, holding me tight while I fell apart. Tell me what's going on right now. Through my tears, I told her everything. The overheard phone call, the insurance changes, the evidence I'd gathered, the police investigation. Sarah listened in shocked silence, her face cycling through disbelief, horror, and rage. That bastard, she whispered when I finished. That calculating bastard. How could he do this to you? An hour later, Detective Rodriguez called again with the full story. He's in custody and has been read his rights, she reported. We got everything on video. The brake sabotage, him testing the damage to ensure it would cause failure at high speed, even him rehearsing his grief-stricken husband act for when your body was discovered. During questioning, he broke down completely and confessed to planning this for over 3 months. 3 months, I whispered, feeling physically sick. Apparently, he's been having an affair with Jessica Miller, his 26-year-old office manager, Rodriguez continued. She's pregnant with his child due in February. He wanted you gone so he could start fresh with his new family without the complications of divorce, and he needed the insurance money to pay for their new life together. The betrayal cut even deeper than the murder plot. Not only had David been planning to kill me, but he'd been systematically building a replacement family while I slept trustingly beside him every night, completely oblivious to his double life. There's more, Rodriguez said grimly. We found extensive evidence that this wasn't his first plan. He'd been researching other methods for months. Carbon monoxide poisoning to make it look like a household accident, staged break-ins gone wrong, even poison that would mimic natural illness. The brake sabotage was just his latest and most refined plan. How long? I asked weakly. How long was he planning to kill me? Based on his internet search history and the timeline of his relationship with Jessica, we believe he started seriously planning your murder about 6 months ago. Right around the time she told him she was pregnant. 6 months. Half a year of living with a man who was actively plotting my death, who kissed me goodnight while researching ways to kill me, who made love to me while planning my funeral. We also found evidence that he'd been slowly poisoning you with small amounts of antifreeze mixed into your coffee. Rodriguez added, "Not enough to kill you quickly, but enough to cause the chronic headaches and digestive issues you've been experiencing." He was testing methods and building up to the main event, the migraines. The nausea, the fatigue I'd attributed to stress and middle age. David had been slowly poisoning me for months, using my body as a testing ground for his murder techniques. He's being charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and domestic violence, Rodriguez concluded. With the evidence we have, he's looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial 6 months later became a media sensation throughout our small town and beyond. Local contractor plots wife's murder for insurance money and secret love child was the headline that appeared in newspapers across the state. Television news crews camped outside the courthouse interviewing neighbors and former clients who expressed shock and disbelief at David's true nature. David's defense attorney, a high-priced lawyer from the state capitol, tried desperately to discredit the evidence and paint David as a devoted husband who'd simply made some poor choices under stress. He claimed the brake tampering was just David checking the safety of my vehicle, that the insurance changes were responsible financial planning, that the affair was a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a calculated betrayal. But the video evidence was damning and undeniable. The jury watched in horrified silence as surveillance footage showed David methodically sabotaging my brakes with the same precision and care he brought to his construction work. They heard the recorded phone conversations where he calmly discussed timing my death for maximum insurance benefit and minimal suspicion. Most damaging of all was Jessica Miller's testimony. Pregnant and facing her own criminal charges as an accessory. She described in detail how David had told her about his plans to solve the Olivia problem permanently, how he'd promised her they'd be together as soon as his wife was out of the picture, how he'd shown her insurance documents and explained how much money they'd have to start their new life together. He said it would look like an accident. Jessica testified, her voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. He said no one would ever suspect him because everyone knew how much he loved his wife. The prosecution also called O'Malley, the mechanic who testified about David's suspicious questions regarding brake failures. They called our insurance agent who described David's unusual interest in accidental death benefits. They called my doctor who confirmed that my recent health problems were consistent with chronic low-level poisoning. David's employer testified that David had been stealing equipment and materials from job sites for months, selling them to fund his secret life with Jessica. Coworkers described how David's behavior had changed dramatically over the past year, becoming secretive and paranoid, often making mysterious phone calls and leaving work for unexplained appointments. The most heartbreaking testimony came from Sarah, who described how she'd watched me suffer through months of mysterious illnesses and marital problems that I'd kept hidden from everyone, trusting David completely, even as he slowly destroyed my health and planned my death. David himself never took the stand, despite his lawyer's apparent desire to put him before the jury. Perhaps they realized that David's calm, calculating personality would only reinforce the prosecution's portrayal of him as a cold-blooded killer rather than a desperate man who'd made a terrible mistake. The deliberation lasted less than 2 hours. When the foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts, David's face showed no emotion at all. No remorse, no surprise, no anger, just the same blank expression he'd worn throughout the trial, as if the proceedings were happening to someone else. 25 years to life, without the possibility of parole. Standing in the courtroom as they led David away in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, he looked at me one final time with something that might have been regret, or maybe just frustration that his carefully laid plans had been discovered and thwarted. "I never meant for things to go this far," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the courtroom noise. "But you did go that far," I replied, my voice steady and clear, loud enough for the reporters to hear. "You went as far as actually cutting my brake lines with your own hands. You went as far as slowly poisoning me for months. You went as far as planning exactly how my death would look and how you'd profit from it. The only thing that stopped you from committing murder was getting caught." David had no answer for that truth. As the bailiffs escorted him from the courtroom, I felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness wash over me. Relief that the nightmare was finally over, that justice had been served, that I was safe, but also sadness for the 22 years of my life I'd given to a man who'd never truly loved me, who'd seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome when it became convenient. 6 months after the trial ended, I made the painful decision to sell our house and most of our belongings. I couldn't continue living in the place where David had planned my murder, sleeping in the bed we'd shared while he researched ways to kill me, cooking in the kitchen where he'd slowly poisoned my coffee every morning. I moved into a small apartment closer to Sarah's neighborhood, keeping only a few mementos from our life together. Not out of sentimentality, but as reminders that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who know your routines, your weaknesses, your complete and utter trust. The ceramic owl sits on my new windowsill. No longer a symbol of our love, but a guardian watching for threats I might not see coming. The insurance company eventually paid out David's life insurance policy to me, since his conviction voided any claims he might have had. I donated most of the money to organizations that help victims of domestic violence, keeping only enough to start fresh in my new life. Jessica Miller pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and received 5 years probation in exchange for her testimony against David. Her baby was born 3 months after the trial ended. A little girl who will grow up knowing her father is a would-be murderer. Sometimes I wonder what Jessica tells people about the child's father. Whether she's moved away to start over somewhere new, whether she ever thinks about how differently things might have turned out. I returned to my job at the library, where my coworkers and regular patrons surrounded me with support and understanding. Reading had always been my escape, and now it became my salvation, allowing me to lose myself in other people's stories while slowly healing from my own trauma. Sarah and I grew closer than we'd ever been before, bonding over our shared experience of discovering that the people we trust most can sometimes be the ones who hurt us worst. She moved into an apartment in the same complex as mine, and we spend most evenings together, cooking dinner and talking about everything and nothing. I still drive to visit her every Wednesday morning, maintaining the routine that David had planned to use against me. But now I take a completely different route, avoiding Route 7 with its dangerous curves and painful memories. The new route takes me through the scenic Valley Road, past farms and forests that remind me there's still beauty in the world despite all the ugliness I've experienced. And I always check my brakes first, sometimes late at night when I can't sleep. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't overheard that phone call. If I'd stayed asleep on the couch that Sunday afternoon, if David had successfully sabotaged my brakes Tuesday night. If I'd driven to Sarah's house Wednesday morning and died in a fiery crash on Wilson's Pass, would anyone have suspected? Would the insurance investigation have uncovered the truth? Would David have gotten away with murder, collected his $200,000, and started his new life with Jessica and their baby? The answer terrifies me more than I care to admit. But then I remember Detective Rodriguez's words from that first night in the police station. The most important thing is that you trusted your instincts and asked for help. Too many victims doubt themselves or stay silent until it's too late. I survived because I listened to that voice in my head that said something was wrong even when everything looked normal on the surface. I survived because I chose to fight rather than run. I survived because I refused to become another statistic. Another woman whose trust was used as a weapon against her. These days I sleep peacefully in my new apartment. No longer afraid of the man lying beside me because there is no man lying beside me. I've learned to live alone, to trust my own instincts, to find safety and solitude rather than partnership. I don't know if I'll ever trust someone enough to share my life again. The betrayal David inflicted goes deeper than attempted murder. It's the violation of everything I believed about love, marriage, and human nature. But I'm working on healing one day at a time, one Wednesday visit with Sarah at a time, one peaceful night's sleep at a time. And every morning when I start my car, I remember that I'm alive. Not because David changed his mind or had a crisis of conscience, but because I chose to save myself. That knowledge, more than any security system or self-defense class, gives me the strength to keep moving forward into whatever comes.